The Met Police has been called racist, sexist and corrupt, and each time the response is the same: we learn lessons. Yet the lessons never seem to stick. Reports are written, promises are made, leaders are replaced, but still the headlines repeat themselves. Of course, there are good officers who serve with integrity, but there are also those who abuse their power, and the silence that protects them, that runs deep. And so the question we're asking is, what happens when someone inside the system dares to speak out? Welcome to the DemocraTEA podcast, where we spill the tea on people, power and politics. I'm your host, Anum, and in this week's episode, we're in conversation with Nusrit Mehtab. Nusrit is a former police officer, and at one point, she was the most senior Asian woman in the Metropolitan Police. Nusrit dedicated her life to public service, but in 2017, she instigated an employment tribunal against the Met Police for racism and misogyny, and soon after left the police force after 30 years of service. Nusrit's the author of Off the Beat, My Life as a Brown Muslim Woman in the Met, and today we're unpacking her journey into the Met, the racism and misogyny she faced inside the largest police force in the UK, and what challenges lie ahead. And before we dive in, thank you so much for watching DemocraTEA. It really is an honour to interview some really fascinating people and learn more about their journeys and share that with you. If you don't mind, I have one wee favour to ask. It would be really helpful if you could please hit subscribe and follow us on social media. It's completely free and helps us grow. And the more we grow, the bigger guests we can bring on and continue having really interesting conversations. Right, let's spill the tea. So Nusrit, I am drinking mocha. I thought that would be a nice little blend between something fun and to give me some caffeine. What's in your cup today?
Well, my cup today is tea, but the one that I really like is soy latte with extra hot milk.
Extra hot milk? You sound like my mother.
Yeah. The thing is, I love soy latte because it just, suppresses the appetite a little bit more, and it just makes you feel healthy as well because you've got soya. And sometimes I have cream on it, and they do ask me, are you allergic to no? And I'm like, no, just add the cream on.
That feels like me and caramel syrups, where I get sugar-free caramel syrup in my lattes, again, to make myself feel that wee bit healthier.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. But that's what I really always have.
Your book, Off the Beat, I read a sentence in it. It said, if you can't change a system from the inside, you have no option but to try and change it from the outside. That starts with telling my own story as a brown Muslim woman in the Met. What happened?
Basically, I've had a long career in the Met, a good few decades actually, and I know I don't look old enough. But I started working in the Met Police, and I worked my way upwards, and I faced barrier after barrier, and it was a hard slog. Every time I tried to get promoted, I was put down. But the thing is, you go along with it, and you do, because it's normalised. That's what I knew, and I always thought, it's going to get better. And to be honest, as the years went past and they tried to knock you down, and I think there's something innate in all of us which says, no, I'm going to fight this. I can do this, and I'm going to prove to you that I'm able to do the job. And when they slowly dismantle you, and actually it's only when you leave the organisation that you start to deinstitutionalise, detox from it, that you realise what actually was going on. And slowly they try to break you down. And, so in the end, you're, okay, I've got to leave now. But every time they did that to me, they made me stronger. And I got this, I don't know where it was, but I managed to get this real inner strength to carry on and fight. And in the end, I think, after decades of fighting, you realise this isn't going to go anywhere. But also, I think it was becoming more insidious, where it wasn't just, the usual people trying to get you down, fight against you. It was getting to the point where Black and Asian officers were actually, when they did speak out, they were going to be disciplined for it. And that means that they would put you under investigation. And I actually saw how that was affecting the my friends and people in the organisation. So when the rank I reached was superintendent rank, which is quite high. And at that time, there were only about, well, I mean, this is only a few years. When I say at this time, it makes it sound years ago, but a few years back, there were only about 10, 11 black and Asian superintendents. But that half of us were under investigation. So I knew that my time was coming. And it's not, you don't fear it because you've done something wrong. You know you haven't. It's just that it just comes around and then it just destroys your whole life. So at that point, and actually, quite honestly, it was affecting my mental health.
Of course.
It got to a stage where I was kind of on eggshells and I was becoming paranoid. So at that point, when the light switch goes on, you think, okay, I've given a lot to this organisation, but it's been at the expense of my mental health, but it was getting worse. And at that point, you have to make a decision. And I made that decision to leave.
To leave. But of course, when you joined the Met in the 80s, you started as at a very junior level. As you say, you rose up to the rank of superintendent. What was that journey like? Putting the racism aside, what was that journey like as a young Asian ethnic minority woman?
Well, it was kind of more at the beginning of the 90s. I found it exciting. It was something different.
What pushed you to join the Met? It's not really common to hear a young Asian girl join the police.
Well, no, it wasn't. And there weren't that many people that looked like me in the Met. And quite honestly, I'd love to say it was, it was because I'd always wanted to be a police, and it wasn't. I think it was just a turn of fate. So after I finished my degree, I went to the careers office and I was like, okay, what jobs are available for me? But the job that I really wanted was an air hostess. And so I walked into the careers office thinking, okay, let me see, what do I need to be an air hostess? And, and she just looked at me and went, computer says no, you're not tall enough. And obviously my body type wasn't the right type. So she said, think again. And she just literally handed me a leaflet and said, go and do something worthwhile. And I was like, oh, okay, that's brutal, bit savage. But yeah, what's out there? And then it just became a challenge because there was a fitness. And when somebody says no, even your own careers officer says it's your wrong body type, you're not tall enough, and basically you're overweight. So you're not going to get into that. You think... okay, let me see. And then when I went into the Met, they had a fitness test, and that actually motivated me, gave me the confidence to say I can do this. So I set myself a challenge to say, nope, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to prove everybody wrong. And that's exactly how it was. But it wasn't because, there weren't many Asian women that I saw in the police. In fact, there weren't many women per se, and certainly not many black and Asian people. So it was kind of some uncharted territory. But once I set my mind to something, then I think, yeah, I'm going to do this. And, I'm going to be successful at this. But, each day you don't actually know whether you're going to get through or not. So you apply, you get yourself fit to do the fitness test, which in itself is really quite grueling. And you think, right, here I go. And really the rest is, once I got in there, realised what I'd got myself into, it was like, no, I can do this. Looking back on it, it was complete madness, really. But, having said that, the career that I've had, some of the things that I've done, I would never have been able to do in any other organisation.
You've gone undercover, you've had different roles. What was that like?
It was just complete craziness and madness, and to do some of the things that I have done. I've worked in counterterrorism. I've worked, as you said, I was one of the first, well actually I was the first in Great Britain to be undercover Muslim female officer and go through the training of that. That was grueling. It was quite about 8 weeks, really tough training. And to do those things and then actually come out the other end and be able to do undercover jobs, the feeling is just something unreal. And having the opportunity to work in counterterrorism as well. And again, being one of the first Asian women to actually go and do that. and then getting promoted at the same time. So I was juggling a lot. But you know, I don't know what I was on, but I was managing to push myself through, and I would never take no for an answer. And I think that's it with me. If you say no, I have to say, really? I can
Watch
do
me.
this. Yeah, watch me do it. And then, you know, as things progressed, I took the path of promotion, and that's not easy. In any big organisation, I think, you know, whether it's policing, whether it's in banking or any other major institution and organisation, a woman of colour wanting to say, I want to be, you know, I want to be at the top table. I want to push through it. That's where it stops. And I think that's where kind of my problem started, because with misogyny and racism, when I joined, that was normal. That was normalized behavior, and it wasn't anything unusual, and everybody was kind of in on it. So you never felt that. But as you progressed in the ranks, it got worse. And then you realize that actually, no, hold on.
How did it manifest itself?
It manifested itself straight away, now that I look back, straight away in the first few weeks of Hendon. Because, you know, look, when I joined, it wasn't in the 1950s or 1940s. We're talking about early 90s. And I'm Muslim. I'm Pakistani. I had a certain upbringing, and there were certain things we didn't do. And in my family, we never, ever wore skirts, full stop. And so... And it was a matter of religion, culture. It was a combination of everything. So to me, society at that time, you know, women wore trousers. I saw them everywhere. So when I went into the Metropolitan Police Service and they gave out the uniform, so after a few weeks of being a civilian, if you like, you know, learning just to adjust yourself, climatize, you get your uniform. And when I got my uniform, it was a skirt. She measured me up, and she just handed me a skirt. And I was like, no, can I have the trousers? I'll take the trouser option. And she went, no, computer says, no, there is no trouser option. Off you go. And that kind of said to me, well, no. I just didn't, you know, now, I mean, it might be different, but I just didn't do it. And actually, still to this day, I don't do it. Don't wear skirts. So it was like, no, I'd like a pair of trousers. And at that time, you realise there was something wrong with the institution, because it didn't cater for everybody.
Yeah.
It was exclusionary, and they hadn't actually grasped the fact that not just myself, but other women might like to have worn the trousers.
But I suppose you were brave enough to then call it out and say, actually, no, this is not what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that I felt brave and I just thought, right, I'm going to take it. It just something that I naturally went with and rolled with. And so it was kind of creating all sorts of other issues, you know, swimming.
I was going to just say then.
For swimming, it was causing me an issue. And, you know, again, when we had PT, gym or fitness classes, the women were wearing these little rah-rah skirts, almost like, you know, and it was like, well, okay, I'm not going to do that. And so it just progressed from one to the other. And then I was othered because I was different. I was a trouble. So I got all those labels and stereotypes.
You were seen as the troublemaker.
She's seen as troublemaker. I was seen it. Yep, she's trouble. But then came the stereotypes of, oh, well, she's a Muslim woman. So what is she doing here? Because, you know, are you able to touch men then? Because if you're saying you can't do this, then all the other stereotypes that you have of a Muslim woman then come into play. And it was then starting to, oh, well, better not sit next to her because she might not want to, you know, she might not want to sit next to you. Or are you going to be able to then stop a man and put your hands on, you know, in terms of detaining somebody? Well, how's that going to work? So all those things then started to act against me. And I was pretty much isolated from there. But not only that, because that did change. They had no choice, but they gave me a pair of trousers, which was belonged to it. They didn't cater for women, so I had to wear men's trousers. And of course, you know, it didn't fit well. It was all sorts of issues. But it also left another thing, that it was almost like my legacy, because wherever I went, when they posted me, there was that, oh, we're getting a Muslim woman.
The one that wears the trousers, not the skirt.
Yeah, the one that's troublemaker. Oh, she's Muslim. Oh, okay. And she's really religious, when actually you don't have to be religious.
You just don't want to wear a skirt.
I just don't. And so, it was as naive as that, because you could say, well, didn't you do your research and didn't you know? Actually, no, I didn't know, because it didn't click on me that in the early 90s, women weren't allowed in such an organisation to wear something as simple as the trousers, considering you're policing different communities with different needs.
Mm-hmm.
And, so that started it, and that was my legacy. So when I went to my first station, the word had already got there, because it's a small world in policing, that you're getting this lady and, she's going to be trouble. And there were all sorts of rumours. And the racism and misogyny started to manifest itself from day one, of not being able to pronounce my name. What's your name? Nusrit. What? And then I would have to phonetically spell it. Well, my name is Nusrit, Nusrit. And it got to the point where actually when I was going outside, even if I was going to a bank or somewhere and they'd say, what's your name? I'd start to give them a whole monologue about, it's Nusrit, and you spell it as Nusrit. And it's those little things that actually you realise they're having an impact. My name is quite simple. It's not a complicated name. And then I'd got nicknames and all, so we can't say your name. So we're going to call you a different name, Nidget. Or we're going to, mispronounce your name.
On purpose.
On purpose. So it was getting to the stage where, it was just draining that you can't, as simple as somebody's name, you're unable to say it. But I think part of it was deliberate because, if you can say Nidget, you can say Nusrit. So
Exactly.
It just started like that. And one of the very first stations I went to, there was inspector who would actually physically touch women, and it was acceptable. They would laugh. Men on the team knew exactly what was going on, but it was all considered to be normalised and acceptable. But with me, again, I was very much left at hand, not knowing what to do or how to treat me. So it's all kind of in my book. So one day, my team, as it was, decided, and it was majority of men on my team, and majority of them were white men. There were a few women, but as I said, it was only I think there were only about 4 or 5 of us. And so what they decided to do, which they found funny, but I think it's all calculated. It's not just laddish, boyish behaviour. It's done for a reason. And so because there was always initiations in the 80s, and they were beginning to kind of leave at the early 90s, but there were still remnants of them. So my initiation was that it was on nights actually, and you walk into, so what happens is you come on parade and they tell you who you're going to be posted with or where you're going to be posted. But I never got posted with anybody regardless on nights. I always walked on my own, and that's because nobody really wanted to work with me. And so, I think I was just like, okay, if you post me, I'll walk on my nights. That wasn't it. But one night duty, I walked into the parade room. And so basically you stand around, the sergeant comes in, he, as it mainly was, will give you your posting. And after the posting, most people just run off and go and, start to patrol. But I noticed that quite a lot of the team remained behind. And so I didn't really think anything of it. And I went to my pigeonhole. So you had, as you walk in on the right-hand side of the room, there were little pigeonholes where you would just check to check your correspondence, see what was in there, if anybody. So as I opened my pigeonhole, there was this brown envelope, and it just had my number on it. My number was 269. Still remember it. And I opened it thinking, okay, so what is this? And it was a vibrator. And there was just this roar of laughter because I'd opened it and I'm like, oh. And, and when you're just like standing there like a dib, really, just like, what? And there was just roar of laughter came from my male colleagues at the back. And then, my reaction was just to like storm off. Maybe that was the wrong reaction. Maybe that was the right reaction. But that was how I felt at the time. But if you break it down again, it was like maximum humiliation. And it was like, why are they all bundled into one little, just standing there? They don't usually do it. So it was to humiliate, but it was to break you down, to say, you might think this is what we think of you. So
they could have chosen to do anything, and they chose to do something of sexual nature.
Yeah, to humiliate somebody who they knew was, or in their minds, really, really religious woman. You wouldn't do it to anybody. You wouldn't do it to women. Why would you choose that to do it to anybody? Yeah, it was their weapon of choice. And again, it just made me stronger. But it meant that I was more, kind
isolated
of isolated from the team.
And then how did that manifest itself at that kind of more junior level when you're wanting to rise the ranks, that you're consistently isolated or ostracised? Because when I speak to people, for example, in politics or investment banking or law, more often than not, alcohol or going out as a big team is a big part of the culture. And if you're not part of that, and if you're not going out for drinks with the team, then actually you're looking even more like an outsider.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was an outsider from day one. So actually, they did me a favour in a little bit, because I don't want to go drinking. I don't drink.
Yeah.
And I can't think of anything else. And there's other things you could do. But they would, the teams at that time, and they still do it. The culture is very much still there. After nights, they would go drinking. And it was like the last thing I want to do is go out.
After a full night of working?
After a full night of working, they would go out, they would drink until kind of, because, I mean, we'd finish our shift at that time. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning. And then they would go drinking. And my first posting was actually at Tower Hamlets. So we had Spitalfield Market and everything there was open. So they would all go out. And I was never a part of that. And they never invited me, and I never wanted to be a part of that. So, it just meant more isolation. Because, as you said, when they go out, when they go drinking, a team really forms. They start to talk about things and have this association. But
and then there's insider jokes, and you're not privy to that.
You're not part of that.
Because I don't drink alcohol, and I don't really want to be around that when people are getting drunk. And fair enough, that's a choice that I make. But then ultimately, when those inside jokes are made, or they're having those conversations, you're even more isolated than you were before.
Probably talking about me.
Probably.
Where is she? Well, and it's that time that people actually start to form. The team gets together. They get to know each other at a different level. And then when they go back, they kind of have each other's backs because, oh, you're all right, or that kind of thing. But with me, what it took for them to say, she's not bad, she's all right, was actually, ironically enough, a pub fight.
Okay.
Where it was a blind beggar on Mile End Road, anybody who knows the East End. And it was kind of, we were called, and there was a fight there in the evening. And as I said, I always walked on my own anyway. Late turn, which is like from 2 till 10. Early turn, which is from 6 till 2, as it was then. So we were on the late turn. And again, I was posted on my own. Not a problem, because I can street walk the street. Well, now they do it. They don't do it for health and safety.
Yay.
And there aren't that many officers. But at that time, it was very much, you were doubled crewed if you were travelling in the car, or even if you were walking. But I was always posted on my own. Again, that was some form of punishment, I guess, but it really didn't bother me, because you get used to it. You form that resilience. But it was a pub fight, and it was a call for a pub fight. And what happens is, when there is that assistance, everybody goes. So I was like, I'm walking, I might be a long way away, but I nominated myself to go. And as it happened, I was kind of just there at the time with the area car. Area car is the fast car that gets everywhere. And I was literally behind them. So they were, I got there and I went in, and so we were kind of together. We went in, and it was a big pub fight. I didn't hesitate. I got bottle thrown, and then somebody kind of jumped on me, but I didn't. I stood my ground, and I managed to finally detain somebody, but I wasn't afraid. And when I came out of that, they were like, yeah, she's all right, she can hold her own. And so my acceptance kind of, in a really warped way, came out of being not, she's okay, she's not afraid to get stuck in. So you have to compromise your safety almost and say, hey, leave it, I'm here, you don't have to look after me, I can hold my own. And that was when, I got that kind of almost like a badge when the people that were there, the area car drivers, went back and said, yeah, she got stuck in.
She's
She ain't
actually all
bad.
right.
Yeah, she's all right. She can do the job. She can handle herself. So that gave me a little bit of respite. But I didn't stay too long on team because it really, I think the whole thing about I just didn't gel with the team. And so as soon as I could, I tried to leave the team. And then there was a job for a first domestic violence unit, as they were then, to set it up. And I took the opportunity to apply for that. So I set up one of the first domestic violence units in the Met.
Wow, that's fascinating. And your route to leadership's taken different roles at different levels. In a conversation I have with many girls from different ethnicities, is that there will always be a level of misogyny and discrimination, even within public institutions and public bodies. And the route to leadership is just never going to be the same compared to a man. What was your journey like?
Very much. I mean, it's a massive organisation, policing, and that journey even today hasn't changed because I still speak to many women of colour, and it hasn't changed. So when I wanted to be, think about promotion, and I think the reason I did that was because I could see how people behave towards you, and it was, well, I'm going to show you that I can do it. And one way to get some form of recognition and control your own narrative, and is to get promoted, because then you're working over them. And so when I started, the whole journey in policing and promotion is toxic now, and it was toxic in the 90s. And really hard because you didn't have many women, and it is very much, although they say it's about showing you evidence and getting in, it is quite word of mouth. If somebody puts in a good word for you, that you will get promoted. And I never had that, and so it was kind of always standing up and to barriers. And actually people deliberately would then try to act against you. So in policing, the idea is that the idea was that you would have to go to your line manager and say, you know what, I'm considering applying for promotion. Promotion season only comes down maybe two times a year per annum, or maybe 3. So you would have to say, hey, I'm interested in promotion. And it would be your line manager that would say, yeah, okay, I'll nominate you. Or they would say to you, you're not ready. And you were also, as women and women of colour, we would always get, you're not ready. You said, but why not? No, you're just not ready. And I remember the first time I said I wanted to go for promotion, he told me I wasn't rounded enough. I was saying, what does that mean?
What does that mean?
Yeah, so rounded enough. What are you saying? Do I need to go and round myself up? Could you expand? And it was just like, oh, no, you have to be more experienced in policing. Which is complete nonsense. So you'd had that barrier. And so if you didn't get on with your line manager, he didn't get on with you, and again, it was he, then there was no chance that you would get through. And that the relationships, the bonds that are formed when you go drinking, when somebody gets to know you, they would say if somebody else was, oh, he's a good egg. So the two things I never understood what a good egg was, or you're not rounded enough. Those are the two things that would get thrown very often to you. And so it was very dependent on your line manager, and you can imagine how difficult that is. So I did actually eventually manage to find somebody that thought, okay, yeah, you know what, I'll support you. That was how promotion worked at that stage. Then you would write your promotion application, and that would go through. And what it was, once you were allowed to go through, you would have to go to assessment centres. And back in the 90s, the assessment centre you'd have about 5 different stations, and you'd go into that station and you'd have to deal with something in 5 minutes, which is ludicrous. I mean, how can you deal with the whole incident in 5 minutes? But that's what it was. So you would go into the rooms, deal with something, come out, and then you'd also have to do like an exam. So I actually did that, and I was very good because I passed within the top 2% of sergeant. So then I went for my inspectors. Again, the same thing. And it was the same barriers. Oh, well, you haven't been inspector, or you need more evidence, you need more experience.
You're not rounded enough.
I'm not rounded enough, and I'm not a good egg. So, in terms of that, you faced, that was the continuous barriers. But again, I pushed my way through to get there, and I scored in the very, very highly. So my scores were in the 90s. So again, there was a knack to it, and I had the knack of getting promoted. But then they say, oh, well, yeah, but it's only a process and you know how to get through the process. So they want to bring you down.
Wow.
They will say, oh, yeah, but that's because you figured out, how to get through a process.
So rather than acknowledging that you are suitable for the role, not just suitable, but more than qualified for the role, they're just saying, you actually just figured how to play the system.
Yeah. Even though you're in the top 1% or top 2%, and there's people that just cannot even get through that. But then also the stigma of, oh, you only got through because you're Asian and you're a woman. And you know what I always said to them? That's the case. Why aren't I commissioner? Well, why am I not commissioner of police? Why am I still, trying to go through a process? Because I'm just breezing through. So the process then changed because that was just so subjective, and it was just so biased. And then to get a post, so it got even more ironic. So once you even got promoted, you then, the way that people used to get posted, and this was back, this wasn't even too long ago, was that there would be a list of jobs, and then you would have to think, oh, well, you know what, I really want this job. So you would have to ring up the person in charge, and you would go for an informal chat.
Okay.
And so obviously there were certain people that were always getting left behind because nobody really wanted us. So it was against who you knew. So all the boys club, they were getting the jobs, and people left on these lists were women and people of colour, because we didn't have the same networks, and we didn't have people in power that would say, yes, I want you. So whenever you said, well, I'd actually like to be going for the job, they'd say, oh, the job's taken. It isn't really for you, because they were bringing in their mates.
Yeah.
So that happened, and then I was left on a waiting list actually for a year, waiting to get a job. And at that time, I made a big fuss and said, no, this is subjective. You really need to change the process. And it shouldn't be dependent on your line manager. So what the process has changed to now is you have to have evidence. And there's no limit. You don't have to be in the police for 30 years to go and get a job, or 10 years or 5 years. That was just another block, way to block people. Mm-hmm. So now it doesn't matter. As long as you have the evidence and they run in competencies, you can then say, well, actually, I might have been in a certain role for 2 years, but here's the evidence. You judge me on my evidence. And then it goes to a central posting panel to get posted. So you're not always, that kid in the school that nobody wants on their team.
Yeah.
And so that has changed. But promotion, we've had, in 2022, the Baroness Casey did her review of policing, and the final report came out in 2022. And one of the things she said about police promotion is that it's really toxic, and it's not based on merit. It's based on who you know. Well, I knew that, back in the 90s, that's how it worked. So actually, it's still very toxic, and most people will tell you that very discriminatory still in the process. Baroness Casey herself has said that.
Do you think the Met Police is still sexist and racist and misogynistic?
Well, I'd go further than that. I think they're institutionally racist, institutionally misogynistic, and institutionally Islamophobic. And the reasons I say that is because we've had scandal after scandal, policing as a whole, but particularly the Met. They just seem to have this knack for attracting the wrong people. If you look at the Charing Cross WhatsApp group that happened, the original one happened, I think, in 2022, where there were a group of people and they were really racist and in their WhatsApps, misogynistic, and even Islamophobic. Now, if you look back to Charing Cross 2.0 that came out not even a few weeks ago, there was a panorama report, I think last Thursday.
Correct.
And one of the things that was evident in that was Islamophobia. Islam doesn't have a place in this country. Muslims are not compatible. They're troublemakers, and migrants should be shot. either deport them or shoot them. And this whole narrative about Islam it's really, if you take it back to my experience of the 90s, I was a Muslim woman, and all those things, the misconceptions, the demonizing, the stereotypes. And yet the station I went to was in Tower Hamlets. It was
an incredibly diverse area.
Yeah. If you think about Tower Hamlets, it's always been diverse, because you've had from the beginning, Jewish community, Irish community, and presently the Bangladeshi community. So how is it that they still had negative stereotypes? I mean, and one of the examples I'll give you was in Tower Hamlets in Lehman Street. It was during Ramzan. And, I was even too afraid to explain what Ramzan was, because I just didn't understand it. And I didn't want my religion to be mocked. Mm-hmm. So I would go in not telling them that I was actually fasting. And I was just, just normally going a normal duty. And when it was time to open the fast, it was to go and do it separately, because to explain that, it was too much. And yet they're policing a community that's Muslim, and they fast during Ramadan.
But they just didn't understand what it was.
Didn't understand it, or didn't want to. So that was then. So where we're back now, where they're actually saying Islam is not compatible, they're troublemakers. And one of the things I think in the Panorama interview that stood out was when one of the officers was saying, well, look, they're all trouble. Islam is not compatible. And look who's in custody. All their names are Muhammad this, Muhammad that, Ali this. And so some of the things they were saying were so toxic that they're ingrained within the institution. And so I would go as far as saying that, we talk about racism and misogyny, which is just ingrained and systemic, but there's also institutional Islamophobia, and we really need to wake up to it, especially in the political situation that we're in now, with what's happening in our society, which is so clear that we need to take that seriously.
I think it's a terrifying thought that there's far-right marches out on the streets across the UK, and at the same time, the people that are meant to be policing those marches and actually keeping people that look like you and I safe actually might agree with those people.
Yeah. I think it goes further. They do agree with those people, because some of the attitudes that I've experienced over the decades that I've been policing, and what I see now, and actually what I hear as well, because I'm very, I mentor a lot of Black and Asian officers, a lot of people.
What do you say to them?
Well, they phone me to tell me about, and we meet to tell me about what's happening to them. And do you know what? It's identical. It's a mirror image of what happened to me. It's not changed. And, if people are saying, oh, well, because a lot of time I get, yeah, but yours was, a few years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I say, okay, read the Casey review, which came out in 2022, 2023. Some of the things, the initiation ceremonies are still there. In one of the things that Casey had said, what happened to females was that in one of the specialist unit, two women were made to have an eating contest. They had to eat, and one of the women had to eat cake, lots and lots of cakes, until she was sick. But that was the initiation ceremony.
That's horrifying.
Could take it back to my initiation ceremony. I've taught police officers now. I did when I joined the university. So when I left policing, I actually went and started to teach police officers how to become police officers, because that's how you change the system from the outside. You start to make them think critically about the institution and pick it apart and see what's going on. And some of the young recruits were telling me, female recruits, that, they were actually really angry when they were posted in a car. They were lucky to be posted. I wasn't. But when they're posted in a car with their male colleagues, rushing to go and sit outside a club or making derogatory comments about women who in certain areas were coming out of clubs in the morning. Now, one of the things I tell in my story is that when I was, the rare times, because I didn't get posted in cars, but after that incident of she's all right, she can handle herself, when I got my little badge that I was okay, on one of the occasions I was posted in the car, and it was the same. We in the area that we worked in, there was a club there, and that was coming out, and it was a mad rush to go and sit outside the club to watch the women coming out and how they were dressed, and some of the commentary that hadn't changed to what I'm hearing now. So where is the change? There isn't really any real change, and it's going to take a while. But the things that I'm being told by officers, the things that I've experienced, the two are mirroring each other. And if anybody doesn't believe it, all they need to do is watch that Panorama program that's coming from the horse's mouth. Some of the sexism or what they were saying about women, how they behave. And, you know, it happened in custody suite, which is, where people come in to be processed when they get arrested. One of the people, almost 2-3 of the people that were actually acting in this behaviour were sergeants. Sergeants are managers. They're supposed to be leaders. Now, if you're getting that kind of behaviour from a sergeant and people were not speaking out, there's a real problem. And the Met has done, they will tell you, they've done a lot to try to change things. But I would say, if that's the case, then why are whistleblowers not feeling safe? Why are people watching and hearing what's going on, but actually not coming forward? Mm-hmm. Because they're frightened. They're afraid that they're going to be, ostracised, othered. And actually, it gets worse, because if we go back, and I'm going back here, I'm jumping to Charing Cross the first time of what happened, a lot of the women were being threatened with either having all their hair cut off, or their uniform cut off. That was in 2022. So when you're working in those environments, you don't feel safe. And so management, and I think there's a real disconnect with the hierarchy saying, well, look what we're doing. We're doing these fantastic initiatives, and, we've got rid of 1,000 officers who weren't fit, and our vetting has improved. But what's happening on the ground? What I'm hearing and what people are saying and what we've heard from Panorama is actually much worse. And people do not feel that they can go forward and say, hey, you know what, that's happening. And until that happens, there's no real change for me. It remains institutionally misogynistic, racist, and now I would add the label of institutionally Islamophobic.
Where does change stem from? Every so often there's uproar about the way that Met Police act. There'll be debates in Parliament. There'll be a national conversation. But it feels like, especially from the conversation we're having, that there's nothing that's changed. Where does that change even come from?
You're right. I think there's a lot of things going on, but for it to manifest in real time change, which makes it better for people on the ground floor, but also our communities, because what's going on internally then gets external. I think that the first thing that the Commission needs to do is actually admit institutionally that the organisation is institutionally racist.
Did that not happen?
Actually, none of them have actually said it. Mark Rowley refuses to say it. He says it's a confusing label. And
confusing label.
You can read it so many ways. So he said that when the Casey review came out, which was in 2022, 2023. And so he's refusing to acknowledge that. He says there's problems. Now, why it's important for him to acknowledge, firstly, that the police, Metropolitan Police Service, but policing as a whole, because what goes on in the Met, which is one of the biggest forces, then goes on nationally.
Of course.
So the important to admit institutional racism, misogyny, and for me, I'll add something else, which is institutionally Islamophobic, is because of the impact. Because once you say that those things, your organisation is that, then you have to deal with it holistically, not as piecemeal. Not to say, oh, we've got a few, and I hate that word. What does that mean? A few bad apples? Really? And then I think that's just so insulting to people that have gone through all the racism, misogyny, and our communities that have faced, the same, if not worse, that to say it's only a few bad apples. And so I think it's easier for them to say that, because then they don't have to deal with the impact and they don't have to do holistic, vast change. And I think that's the first step. Second step, I think, to show that actually, we are taking seriously the real change to happen, meaningful change, is to take away any complaints that come in on misconduct, on discrimination, sexism, and any allegations of sexual assault against police officers or domestic abuse away from the police. It has to be independent. Police can't be allowed to mark their own homework. So my first thing is show me that you're really concerned and serious about change. Start to have it separately. Take all that away. That would be the first thing. And, I hate to say this because sometimes it's not as easy as just changing the leader and then all of a sudden, everything turns. But I think on this occasion, Mark Crowley has been in for 3 years and whistleblowers are still not feeling safe, or people are not feeling safe to say this is happening or that person's made this comment. So that to me shows that he's totally failed. He's had 3 years. His contract is in for 5 years. But I think at this stage, the Mayor of London needs to say, enough, Mark, you've had 3 years. Now I think I should bring somebody else in that can deliver all the change, but not bring in somebody that's been selected and it's just one of the good old boys. They need to bring in, and they need to start to have an independent election on who chooses the Commissioner of Policing, but not just in the Met. I think nationally we need to start changing it. The people who are being policed need to have a say in who they think will come in and do a job. And everybody has to sell it to the public, like the mayoral election, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. And I think Londoners need to vote in the case of the Met. That's when I will be convinced there's real changes. Even if we have the 2 out of 3, I think that shows me that's where change begins, because it seems like we're doing the same thing. We're just saying, yes, we take this seriously. And you know what? We've taken 10 people or 1,000 officers and vetting's improved. But actually, there's still words, meaningless words. So if you're asking me what I think should start to happen, that's how I would be convinced that they're serious about changing.
You eventually left the Met and launched legal action. At what point did you turn around and say, I need to go public?
It was very much that when I left the Met, I started to apply for many jobs, as you do. And what gave me a real indication of that I was still being victimised and harassed is that I applied with a certain company, and it was teaching police recruits. So they were the Met had sublet, if you like, to that company. Actually, they had approached me and said, "Look, we've seen what your record is. We'd like you to apply." So I applied, and they were really enthusiastic. And I had the interview, and they actually said, "Well, you're applying for role A, but actually, with your experience, we want to put you forward for B, which we think you're highly qualified and we're really excited to have you." And I was like, okay, fine. My interview was really good. That's the feedback I got. Mm-hmm. So I'm not just saying it because, you can think you're really great and actually you're not. So they, and then it went quiet. And there was one additional step that they had to take. And ironically enough, they had to approach the Met to kind of, if you like, sanction it. And then I heard nothing. So something that was really, they were pursuing me, asking me to apply, telling me how good I was, and they were going to put me forward for a higher role, then just goes quiet. And I was phoning them and saying, and they went, "Oh, you haven't been successful." So I said, "Oh, okay." And that was it. So I said, "Why?" And never heard anything, and they didn't tell me. And then I thought at that point, I realised that that's going to affect the rest of my life. So the Met are already stopping me. And at that point I thought, no, I've got to do something. I've got to be public because this has gone on for too long. And, it's when you leave and you think, I've tried to change, you need to decompress, you need to deinstitutionalize, and you see what's going on. So at that point, because of that, and because generally I thought, no, Met needs to change, that's when I went public, and that's when I initiated my employment tribunal. Employment tribunal wasn't, it was to actually, it's there for a reason. There's legislation, and that legislation is to stop employers from abusing their employees and from breaching legislation. So that was the right thing for me to do. And I did. And it was interesting because in my employment papers, that was one of my complaints, to say when my prospective employer went to the Met to say, this is the person we're selecting or we put forward, it all went quiet. And it was in my papers that I found that one of the people that I had complained about whilst I was in the organisation and whilst I'd put in my employment tribunal was the person that actually said no to me.
Wow.
And that's where I was able to draw the dots. How is that even possible that you actually think you're going to get away with that? And that's the corrupt nature of what goes on. So
It feels like there's just this level of accountability that they think is just not going to touch them.
yeah. And they wouldn't have unless I'd got the employment tribunal papers to actually when I put that complaint in against, saying, well, what happened there, that they were able to give me an answer. And what happened to that individual who blatantly, should never have made that choice, should never have taken part in that. If they passed it on to somebody else, that would have been quite ethical. And, saying, well, I'm being open and transparent. I'm not going to make a decision. I'm going to pass it on to somebody. The outcome would have been the same because, let's not kid ourselves. But the fact that they actually decided to make that decision when they've had numerous complaints from me of racism and bullying and harassment. So that gives you the kind of nature of it. And so the rest is it's in the book. Yeah, but it was been a great career. I don't want anybody to kind of pop on me because that's not what it's about. It's about I am a fighter. I am a survivor.
It's about your lived experiences.
As I've said to you at the beginning, some of the jobs that I've done, my undercover work, going through promotion, and just some of the roles I could never have done in any other organisation.
How did it feel when you were writing the book? Was it quite cathartic?
It was. It brings it back, and quite emotional as well. And so it was tears and laughter, and an element of sadness. Let's not say that. When I left, I felt sadness because policing was a part of me for so long, and policing becomes you. Because you live and you breathe it. And when you go through so much kind of trauma of trying just to do your job, that it actually, when I wrote the book, even when I left on my last day in policing, I cried. Tears just rolled down my eyes, and it was so sad because, so all police officers carry a warrant card, which is an identification. And when you leave, you have to give that warrant card. Considering that I'd carried it around for decades, it becomes a part of you. Of and to hand that over, it was just to prize it, give it back, I didn't really know that it was going to be that emotional and actually that difficult because it just brings back everything for you.
You dedicated your life.
Yeah, so it was. And then to kind of write that book, because then you give yourself time to recover, and then writing that book again brought it all back. But I wanted it to be a positive book because I wanted to show the type of things that I have done, my capabilities, my abilities, and how I was always fighting the system. But also, when I came out and I was quite vocal, the abuse I got on social media, because social media is one of those things, isn't it? Especially X as it's now, so toxic in itself. But the abuse that I was getting was from officers, serving officers.
Wow.
On anonymous accounts. So that became one of my bugbearers, that they were just so nasty and so abusive.
How on earth are police officers making fake accounts on social media to troll you?
Yeah. But they,
Is there not some sort of police code of conduct that breaks?
Well, it didn't. And I actually made a big fuss about it. So they're still there. They're still there. They're still doing their on social media, very much so. Retired officers as well, ex-officers, but also current police officers. And it's quite ironic because you actually look at their accounts and you think, And one of the police officers that really was just abusive and trolling, some of them they would put their titles would be PC, DC, so and so. Or a couple of the trolls, it's Inspector Gadget, those type of things. But once you go into their accounts, what you find is that they will tell you the only thing they talk about is policing, about the duties. Oh, I've done late turn but so they're police officers.
They're police officers.
You know that they're serving police officers. And actually, if you went through their account, you'd be able to find out exactly where they serve.
Identify them.
Yeah. So they're very much anonymous police accounts has been a bane of a lot of people's life. They don't only abuse police officers who speak out. They start to abuse members of the public. They abuse any, politicians, members of the public, because that's something that they think that we don't know who they are. And the thing they'll tell you is, I'm never going to put my name down because if I do, I'll get in trouble. Because some of them, I always turn around and say, oh, you're the faceless keyboard warrior. I'm who I am. So why don't you tell us who you are?
Exactly.
And they go, ha ha, do you think I'm stupid? You know what will happen. So we know you're a police officer.
Exactly.
And I've tried to tag in lots and lots of senior police officers to say, this is a real problem, tackle it. And I think since, Sarah Everard and Carrick and the Casey review, a lot of them will then kind of, have private accounts, or they'll protect their accounts, but they're still out there.
There was a recent Panorama documentary that came out where it was documented where police officers made quite frankly Islamophobic comments, racist comments, misogynistic comments, and something that terrifies me is the thought that at these far right rallies that we're seeing pop up all across the country, the police officers that are meant to be policing and looking after everyone actually hold those views.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we have to be realistic, because police officers are taken from the society and community. And I believe that, if you thought about reform, how it's gaining control, and some of the things that we've witnessed from police officers and some of the Islamophobia. Now, I go back to Panorama. If you listen to what both of those officers, and there were two that they showed, talking, different officers at different times talking about Islam, and a lot of it was the same rhetoric that I hear coming from Tommy Robinson. Oh, Islam is the problem. They're all criminals. It's not compatible with the values of our society. Whose words are they? They come from reform. They come from people like Tommy Robinson. So, of course, they share those views. And the sad and the frightening thing is not only that when they go to these rallies policing it, how they behave, because they don't really have a choice there. If there's violence, they've got to deal with it. But when they go out and police ordinary communities, and some of these are based in high Muslim areas, how are they reacting to them? Because they don't actually think Islam is compatible for being in Britain. They think it's an awful religion, and migrants should be shot or deported or shot in the head. So what's that telling you about their views and where their views are coming from? And they're becoming more and more braver because, let's be clear. I think we've had this since Brexit, since even before Brexit was happening. Look at the dehumanising language that was being used against generally people of colour who weren't white, and especially Islamophobia. How they behave towards Muslims, this constant demonising, dehumanising, stereotyping that, it's all Muslims and Muslims are bad and terrible and responsible for everything. So that's been happening for a while in our society. It's been creeping up. And I think over the last, year or so, it's just kind of hit us so hard. We're like, okay, what happened here? And if reform is getting 4 million voters, and by the time the election comes, that there is growing, how many police officers are going to be a part of that? How many police officers? Because in the Tommy Robinson rally, there were a lot of police officers that had left the organisation. And, Unite the Kingdom, I say it's Destroy the Kingdom rally, as I say it. But there were so many ex-police officers who had just actually left, that was saying, yes, I've left the policing and now I'm going to this rally because I think, the way the country is going. And small boats is always that one, isn't it? It's always used as an excuse. But when you actually scratch under the surface, it's many different things. And I was at the anti-racism rally that day when it was the Unite the Kingdom or Destroy the Kingdom rally. And I was trying to leave the rally because we were kettled in, and I was trying to find a route out. And I found somebody that was also from who was at the Unite the Kingdom rally, and so we both kind of came face to face and we started to chat. And I was saying to him, why have you come here today? And he said, well, it's like the small boats, the migrants, they're really a problem, and the usual rhetoric of undocumented males. And I said, okay, but you are aware it's about 4% of all migration, maybe even 5%. 97% is legal migration. But as we got talking, he kind of said to me, well, I can't even get promoted at work. And it's because of people like you. You're a woman, you're Muslim, you're brown, and I can't get promoted because you're going to take my job. If you're black, if you're from the LGBTQ plus community. So I said to him, well, actually, I have lost out to many white men. So that doesn't make any sense. And he said to me, well, maybe you should have added that you were LGBTQ plus, and then you would have got promoted. And so it's just scratching the surface of, I can't get a job because of you. So it starts off with small boats and then and there's so many different layers of issues. And so that shows you that actually the number of people that are supporting that rhetoric, and it's being used, but it's becoming so normalised. And I mean, raise the flag.
What does that even mean?
What is it all about? Let's raise the flag and, if you go through an area, because there's certain areas that don't actually have any flags, but if you go through certain areas and it's flags on every single pole, it's really chilling. As you're driving along, and I recently was going, I think I drove through, it was Romford or one of those, and I can't even remember where. But as I was driving, there was a flag and every single pole, a majority of the houses. Now I was just driving through and it was actually quite chilling and it made me uncomfortable. And I'm thinking to myself, it's a flag. It's the flag of St. George, and St. George's flag is actually, he was the patron saint of 25 different countries, and one of them being Palestine. So, and he was born in modern day Turkey, and actually died in I think what is now Palestine. So, he was patron saint of many, many countries, and he was non-white. So I don't regard that flag as, as intimidating. But driving along, I felt really uncomfortable. Yeah. And I just wanted to get out there. And the whole narrative has been taken over that, is to do with patriotism. And you have to be a patriot to raise that flag. Actually, no, it's to do with ethno-nationalism. And so, again, that's something that's been manipulated. So when I sometimes think if I visited the house of many police officers who would have that flag, and we should all be proud of that flag, and we should reclaim it, but it still feels quite intimidating when I see it.
And I think it is really important that people reclaim the flag because it is being appropriated by the far right.
Yeah.
Going back to your book, you said it was cathartic. You said there was a lot of sadness, but there's a lot of happiness. But surely there must be hope for the future of the Met.
There has to be. And my book kind of actually says that the future are the police officers that I was teaching, the new police officers, getting them to think critically and actually getting them to, dismantle and think about the organisation. There has to be hope, because policing belongs to us, belongs to all of us. Police, in our communities, we are being policed. So we have to have change, and something has to give. But policing is for everybody, and I think we all need to speak out about it. It's not just for one community. It's not just for certain people. It's our policing.
Before we wrap up, we've got our final section that's called That's My Cup of Tea, which is a quick fire round. So don't think too much. What's your go-to comfort food, Nusrit?
Oh, chocolate. Chocolate, any chocolate, and it's not, give me chocolate and I'm happy.
Tea or coffee?
Oh, tea.
Do you think the Met will ever change?
Hope so.
Would you rather be stuck in a lift with Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage?
I think give me Boris Johnson, at least he'll make you laugh.
That's also true. What's a stereotype about the police that you wish people knew?
More about the institutionally Islamophobic.
What's your favourite quote or something that grounds you when life gets a wee bit stressful?
I think for me, it's silence isn't empty. And I think that's so important, because a lot of people are silent, and it's just so much in just being silent for a minute, which sometimes I find hard.
Nusrit, this podcast is unfiltered, unapologetic and disruptive. You've spoken quite a bit about bad eggs and how you hate that term, but do we think the Met Police will ever truly get rid of its bad eggs?
Well, it's got a big job, ahead of it, and I hope it takes a big brush and crushes those eggs. So yes, eventually.
Thank you so much for joining us. A huge thank you to Nusrit Mehtab for joining me in spilling the tea on what it's really like to spend years of service inside one of Britain's most powerful and most scrutinised institutions. Now, I want to hear from you. If racism and misogyny exists within the very structures meant to protect us, who keeps those systems accountable? Do you trust the police? And can an institution that's broken from the inside ever truly reform, or does real change mean starting again? Drop your thoughts in the comments, share this episode, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss our next episode of DemocraTEA, where we spill the tea on people, power and politics.